Okay, part 6 of Michy's Endgame technique book focuses the chapter on bearing in, and I'm going to cover it in the course of 3 videos. Part A, which I'm going to do in this video, looks at what Michy says himself in his book. Then I'm going to do a second video on what other commentators have said, kind of as I've been researching this, what I've learned from other commentators such as Michy and Gary Koscielny. And then part C, I've come across some very interesting and kind of what I think is very helpful stuff on saving the gammon. Particularly in a chat between Dan Rivera and Grant Hoffman on Backgammon is Beautiful. That I think is worth a video in itself. So we're going to break part 6 into 3 videos, starting tonight with, I said, what Michy says himself about bearing in. And by bearing in, we've looked. The first 5 parts have been looking at bearing off, taking checkers off. And now we're looking at getting checkers into our home board as effectively as possible, hopefully not to run into trouble. We know we win the game if we do it right. And he breaks his chapter into several sections. I'm going to some of them are very short. So section 1 is very short. He just talks about getting checkers from the outer field into your home board as fast as possible. So in the situation I just showed you there, simplest thing to get checkers in, you can move from your 11 point in and from your 7 point in. You got 2 checkers in, all as well. He has a little rant about people who might, move the checker in with the 6 from the 11 point and then not move the other checker in and instead go 10 to 7. And he said, look, why would you do this? It doesn't really cost you much in equity, so I'm not really going to bother with this. But he does then, he throws doubles a cube, and even with the, throwing in the double, the cube in play, it still doesn't cost you much in equity. But he says, look, it's crazy not to bear 2 checkers in at once. And I have found that taking that in mind, bearing that in mind as I play, it's kind of helpful to know, look, just get the checkers in. Seems to be the most effective thing of the lot. And a lot of what he's talking about ties in with the section, which is a very short one about flexibility, where he says, look, that position we were in, you are suddenly in difficulties. Some numbers, you play a 6 in the next go, you've very little choice what you're doing with that 6. So by leaving, getting checkers in as fast as possible, it tends to leave you in a more flexible position. That was a very quick section. The next one is 2. He just talks about what's the ideal structure. Ideal structure, if you're you're aiming for as you bear in, is to finish with something like this. This is a nice position to be bearing off then, and we're strong favourites to win. The absolute worst possible structure would be something like that, because it's very inflexible and will lead us to difficulties. So you don't want to put your checkers deep. You want to leave kind of 6-5-4, avoids you with trouble. The biggest part of his early part of the chapter is this one, preparing for the double 6. So as you come to bear in, just think about how a double 6 would play next go. So in this situation, I think most people quite reasonably would go from the 17 point to the 11 point with the 6. But it's what you do next. You could move it forward one more, or you could move the other checker forward maybe. But if you do that, either of those are going to leave you. Double 6 takes off your 4 rearmost checkers here. And if we take off our 4 rearmost checkers there with either of those moves, we're going to leave a blot on our 6 point. And he still has to hit you, but you give him a 1 in 3 chance of hitting you, and the game just turns on its head. You don't need to give him that chance. So instead, in this situation, the safest thing to do is take that checker off the 6 point, move it onto the 5 point, and now if you take off your 6 rearmost checkers, you find that we're safe. And I think for most people who've been playing for a while, you'd know as you're bearing in that you're watching for the double 6, which is going to be a problem. And instantly, if double 6 is okay, double 5 will be okay, double 4 will be okay. So that's why just double 6 is the problem. And if you're okay with that, you can take it. The other rows are okay. But so a quick test yourself situation. First of all, what you do with the 3-1, if you want to pause and unpause. Well, again, the temptation here, you're kind of first starting out, is we'll get those 2 checkers in off the 7 point. So you play 7-4 and 7-6. Problem now is if you look at a double 6, double 5s, you're going to give black a shot, which you don't need to give him. So instead, going back to it, yes, you might move 1 in with the 6. And again, you see I've put the cube into play here because Michy has put the cube into play in all these positions, really just to try and add to the importance of it. But it's what you do with the 3, and the only way to kind of save a problem with double 6 is just the 3 you play 4-1. You don't like bearing the checker deep, but in this situation it's worth it because your double 6s are no longer a risk. Now, one thing that I just would note here is you stick this into XG. Playing this wrongly doesn't cost you a hell of a lot of equity at all, because an awful lot has to go wrong for you to lose the game. You have to roll the double six. Your opponent then has to hit the blot, and the chance of these things happening, sometimes it's okay, but you might as well get it right, even if it doesn't cost you much equity. Why not? Let's just do it the right way, the safest way. And section 5 takes that double six and moves it on then to a slightly higher level. He calls it double six, the advanced level. And I'll show you a position here that he uses to sum it up. What are we going to do? We roll 6-1. We have a checker on the 14 point. Well, the 6 obviously is forced. We have to move it to there. What do we do with the 1? Well, clear from the rear, kind of tighten things up. Surely the simplest thing is just to move it in there. Double sixes aren't a problem. Look, your 6 rearmost checkers are going to clear quite nicely. Surely that's not a problem. But think about it, when we do clear our 6, we roll our double sixes and we clear our hindmost checkers. Look what's left. If our opponent doesn't roll a 6 and we roll again and our opponent's still in the bar, any 6 leaves a shot, any 5 leaves a shot, 4s are problematic. There's a lot of bad numbers in there which we didn't need to leave. So the second part, the advanced part of preparing for double 6, is also then preparing for what happens after double 6. So going back to that position again, as I said, the 6 is forced, but we can avoid that problem by just taking that checker on the 5 point and nudging it forward. And now if we roll a double 6, well, look, those checkers come off, but we've got an even number at the back, and double 6s aren't a problem. Now, sorry, double 6s are a problem, double 5s are a problem, double 4s are a problem. We're not out of the woods, but it's not any 6 or any 5. It's only double 6s, double 5s, double 4s. We were always going to have a bit of a problem situation. It's not clean, but that's a much better situation. Having, going back to one of Michy's early chapters about the even number, your last thing being even. And again, I would just note that putting this into XG and playing around with it, I found that the effect on your PR is actually minimal with this, but you might as well get it right. And if you're playing a knockout game where you don't really care about PR, and you leave yourself in a situation where any 6 plays badly and you play it badly and you get hit, you'd be kicking yourself. So you might as well get it right. Chapter 2, section 1 looks at the ace point game. And interesting thing with this, I misread his question. I was set up my positions on XG too early. But the big thing with this is, remember the chapter on the ace point game, building a mountain structure. You don't like gaps. So if we play 13-6 here with our 5 and our 2, we haven't made a mountain in the middle of our shape on the 4 point. We've got that valley there which we don't like. So that's not right. So instead, we want to make that by going 11-4 here. We make a checker on we want it on a 3, 4, and 5 point. We've done that, and that's the right move. And anything else is an error. But as I was doing that, I was thinking that's not quite what Michy had, and I was kind of thinking through, there must be something different here. And so Michy always sticks the cube into play, but if you stick the cube into play, actually, anything other than 11-4 is a blunder. So that wasn't the problem. So I had to look at it again and realize what I'd done was I'd set up my opponent's checkers completely wrongly. So I'd put the white checkers in correctly, but the black ones are wrong. What Michy actually has in the book is something like this, where he still has a checker on the bar. And with this, there's a really nice way to play the 5 and the 2. Your 5 comes down from the 13 point. That stops you getting a joker roll of double 1s. And you play 6-4, and now you've got a lovely mountain structure here. He can't hit you. If he comes into the 1, he's still not going to be out to hit you. And you've made that mountain structure. The next section, I think for me is what I learned most from this chapter, is this thing about clearing the bar point. So we have a situation here of clearing the bar point, and I kind of think I'd know what to do now, but certainly earlier days I'd have said, look, clear from the rear, get those checkers in, let's keep the 6 prime as long as possible. So I'd play 10-6 and 8-5, and I think this is great. But that leaves you very inflexible later on. Bringing those checkers in off the 7 point can be a problem later on. So instead, the correct move here is to get those checkers, clear that 7 point now. And it doesn't matter if we've broken our 6 prime, because he's still going to have really struggled to get out. We're still favourites to win a gammon here. But at least our chances of winning the game are much tighter for doing that. So I played around with this, and I thought, well, what if we took that position, and instead of having a checker on the bar, we kind of move it out? Now do we go clear from the 7 point? The answer is no. So this isn't in the book. This was just me fiddling around with it and saying, no, you don't clear the bar if you've got loose checkers. And I kind of came up with that situation. So look what happens if we did clear the 7 point like this. he can throw a joker roll. He could roll a 6-1 or a 6-3, hit us, and he completely turn the game around. So we just don't need to take that risk. And I suppose that's the biggest thing I learned from this is that, yes, we want to clear the 7-point where we can, but the priority is safety. So if we can clear the 7-point and not leave black any shots, or opponent any shots, we should do it. But if we're going to leave even joker rolls afterwards, we're better off playing for safety and make sure we play the safer play. But here's the thing: if you look at that checker on the 8-point, in another example with XG, and I put that checker on the 8-point onto back to our 10-point, and said, well, look, what's the right thing to do? And it's clear the bar, because there's no risk of being hit with the joker roll. So quick one for yourself. What do we do with a 4-3 here? And you can pause and unpause pretty quickly, because I think you'll work out that the moral of this is basically the correct thing to do here: clear the 7-point. And I played around some further with it, and I said, well, what happens if he's further ahead, less far behind in the race? And I'll take those checkers on his 13-point and put them through onto his 1-point. Does that make a difference? It did make a difference. We didn't want to let him out as easy, because he could roll double sixes and suddenly, the race is much tighter. But still, clearing the bar was the best thing to do. I decided, well, what if we take bigger rolls? So 5 and a 4, we'll put if we clear our 7-point with a 5 and a 4, we're moving our checkers deeper than we might want to. Is that a problem? Nope, you clear the bar point. It's nearly always clearing the bar point. And I said, this is what I really learned from this chapter. And so I came up with Allen's rule. And Allen's rule is basically, if you can clear the bar point without leaving any loose checkers or indirect hits, you should do this. I tried to find a way that it was wrong. And I did find one position where it was wrong, and it was this. I took the position, I gave him the higher rolls, the 5 and the 4, so you're clearing deeper. I took his black checker on his 13 points, and I moved him ahead so the race is much closer. And looking at that, just it's so tight that he could roll double sixes and escape. In this situation, you're better off clearing your 8 points. But look, clearing the bar point is still not an error. And so for me, from now on, I'm kind of working on the basis of this. Look, if in doubt, I'm clearing the bar point, because it saves us so much trouble later on. The last section, he talks about no contact, and he has a few guidelines when it comes to a situation where we're beyond contact here. First thing is achieve the ideal shape. So that's the ideal shape. Walter Trice, I think, was the person who came up with this, where you have 7 on the 6-point, 5 in your 5-point, 3 in your 4-point. The reason that's ideal is because if you don't have that shape, you are likely to have wastage later on in your roll. So you're likely to be rolling a bigger number than you need to clear a point later on. If you look at that there, both us and our opponent have 79 pips left, but we're in a much more effective position. So that's the position you're aiming for. So when you're bearing in against contact, you're trying to do that. And I suppose guideline 2 is kind of indicated by that. Don't start sticking checkers deep, and only use, if you can. Yes, you might make your 5 and your 4-point, but nothing else. So this situation he gave here, he was kind of saying, look, we've 6 checkers. I don't know if you can see that clearly. 6 checkers on our 6-point. You might say, well, look, we'll play 6 to 1 and clear one of those checkers off, unstack. Huge mistake. You can do anything in that position as long as you don't do that, and it's absolutely perfectly right. You could unstack with the 1, and that's fine. So you can put checkers on your 5-point or your 4-point, and likewise, if we'd rolled a 5-2 instead, there's no wrong. When I went to put this through XG, everything was a 0.000, no error whatsoever to do anything you like, as long as you don't go 6 to 1. So you can bring 2 checkers down to the 13-point. You could play 9 to 4 is fine. You can play you can even play 8 to 3 is fine. But don't bring 6 to 1. You're just burying checkers you don't need to bury. And the final thing is just to cross over with as small a number as possible. I think that's straightforward enough. So if you roll a 6 here, you wouldn't use it to get the checker on your 11-point in like that, because you've used 6 dots on a dice to get a checker into a crossover that's worth 5 instead. Yeah, I think it's straightforward enough. You'd cross over as effectively as you can. And that's it for this chapter. In a nutshell, that's it, really. As I've said, I'm going to do a second video because Michy has some very interesting analysis and commentary in this area. Gary Koscielny of Sunny Florida Backgammon Club has good points. I'm even going to include a couple of pieces of advice from Phil Simborg. and that'll be coming up in the second video. And then I'm going to do a third video, as I said, about saving the gammon when you're racing to try and get your checkers in before your opponent has borne off all theirs. Particularly useful and a particularly helpful little system that I'm going to show you in the third video. And those two videos will be coming up shortly.